But one wonders, where does that first, sort of like in the brain where there is the connection, where does that come from? That what are they doing that suddenly they say, the aha theory?
Well, often these people are looking for the aha moment. So they have a belief, like Jim did. Jim believed that matter must be made up of some kind of mechanical particle. He believed we could have a mechanical description of the universe because he's a very good mechanic himself.
One aha moment is reading Einstein and going, aha, Einstein's talking nonsense, Einstein is wrong. And that's quite a sad conclusion to come to, because then you realise that all these people who are followers of Einstein, well, they've decided to believe something that is wrong. So that's one aha moment.
Universe, because he's a very good mechanic himself. He has a whole fleet of cars that he fixes. And so he was looking for some kind of structure that would fit together in a logical pattern. And he spent years looking for that, and he finally found it, or believed he'd found it, with his circlons, which link together in this pattern that happens to mimic the pattern of the periodic table.
But even the neurons in his brain, where was that, the Gestalt connection?
Well, I think in Jim's case, he just had a fundamental belief since childhood that the universe was mechanical. And I should say that up until the late 19th century, all physicists thought the universe was mechanical. Newton thought the universe was mechanical. Descartes thought it was mechanical. Galileo thought it was mechanical. Even well into the 19th century, people thought it was mechanical. So this was...
So, if physicists are now thinking the universe isn't mechanical, they've gone on the wrong track. And I think if they've done that way, they've followed the sort of thing that Einstein's been telling them. And so that's how deeply, profoundly wrong they can be. As from Newton, we have the universe is mechanical. And if they're thinking something else, then obviously they've gone wrong.
Even well into the 19th century, people thought it was mechanical. So this was, as it were, a very natural impulse to think that way. And Jim had grown up on a farm, fixing farm machinery and building cars, and so he believed that the machine was the fundamental model of the world, and that the universe was effectively a big machine.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. You're thinking of the universe as being like a machine. It's a mechanical machine, and it's working. Very complicated machine and so forth, but still working like a machine. It's quite a simple model.
Interesting to me too, and hearing that on the farm and reading that, the synapse in his brain that connected birth of animals and seeing that, and also with the farm machinery that needed to be fixed.
That's a very nice observation, Connie, because the other element of Jim's theory is that there's a sort of lovely organicness of it. So in his theory of the creation of the universe, it begins with, the universe in Jim's theory begins with two particles, a negative particle and a positive particle, and he calls them the male and female particles. And he explains the creation of the universe as these two particles coming together and like mating and dividing like a colony of cells. So there's this very organic dimension to his theory that's combined, as you say, with the mechanical.
Now, towards the end of the book, you go to a seminar in Santa Barbara.
Yes.
Who was there, and what were they talking about?
Well, I went to this seminar. It was the world's first conference on string cosmology, which is the application of string theory, which we've been hearing so much about, to the universe as a whole. And all of the big names in physics, a huge number of big names in physics were there. Stephen Hawking was there, Brian Greene was there.
In some ways, Brian's become the father of it. And it's sort of funny, because he was an actor on Broadway as a child.
Really?
Yes, yes.
Well, Brian Greene has become very much the public face of string theory with his book, The Elegant Universe, and the subsequent books. So he's become the public face of string theory. And in fact, when this conference was held, the PBS series of The Elegant Universe was in fact just about to start. So he was off between doing this conference. he was off promoting it, and
Yeah.
it seemed to be everywhere in the news at once. So it was perfect timing for this conference.
Explain just briefly for our friends in the audience, what is string theory? Is there a possibility that there are more dimensions to the world than we know?
According to string theory, there are more dimensions to the world than we currently experience. What string theory is it's an attempt to explain the fundamental nature of particles. And according to string theory, all particles, things like electrons and protons, can be described as these like one-dimensional strings which are kind of waving. Just imagine a piece of string or like a piece of rubber band waving, and they're usually connected around into loops. So they're like little rubber, like a rubber band, but it's all wiggling and waving in a very complicated way, which is meant to explain the properties of the particles. But these strings exist in a 6 or 7 dimensional space. Now, you ask, where are these dimensions?
Yeah.
We haven't seen them yet, nobody's ever measured them, we actually don't have any empirical evidence. But the string theory view is that they exist in such a tiny, tiny...
So, sounding very silly there really at the moment. They've got all these things which nobody's actually measured. They're sticking it all together to try to make a theory up. Anyway.
Amount of space that our equipment isn't yet good enough to have seen them. But eventually, if we get high enough energy particle accelerators, we should be able to see these tiny dimensions.
Is this something that can be used in our ventures to Mars, to space?
Not very likely. Even the biggest proponents of string theory acknowledge that it is unlikely to have practical applications. And that's simply because to reach the scale on which these strings are vibrating, you need such enormous amounts of energy. Like we need particle accelerators, much, much bigger than the ones that we have at the moment. So these are very expensive machines, very difficult to make, very difficult to run. It's unlikely to have any practical applications. Its value is supposedly that it shows us the fundamental nature of our world.
There was a great line here, I think it was by Richard Feynman, about getting out of the buggy and walking.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, explain that.
Well, the great quantum theorist Richard Feynman once did a very strange thing. He spent months working on trying to solve a problem that Newton had solved using only the mathematics available to Newton in the 17th century. So he didn't use calculus, which this problem requires for a normal physics student to do today. Feynman insisted on using pre-calculus mathematics, and it took him months to solve this fairly simple problem. But he was immensely proud of himself when he'd done it, because he said it was like going for a ride in a buggy. He'd abandoned all the fancy machinery, the modern automobiles of contemporary physics and mathematics, and he'd done it for himself, solved this difficult problem with handmade tools of very ancient mathematics. And he felt immensely proud of himself because he'd done it for himself. It was DIY physics. And that's what I think is going on with Jim Carter and the people I chronicle in my book. They want to make the universe for themselves. It's
Do
like
they have
getting
an organization? They do have an organization for them, people of this ilk.
Yes, and that's one of the things that surprises many people, is that there is a whole organization of these fringe physics theorists. It's called the Natural Philosophy Alliance, and it now has over 2,000 members, and they have a huge website cataloguing hundreds and hundreds of books and thousands of scientific papers produced by these fringe theorists. And they have an annual conference, and they produce a big book each year of alternative physics.
As I pointed out earlier, we are getting more organised. There's more of us coming together.
And hopefully the emperor does have clothes. But what you read, what you wrote as you came back from that group in Santa Barbara.
Yes, this is my thoughts as I was driving back from Santa Barbara attending the world's first string cosmology conference. And this was the moment when I actually decided I needed to write a book about this subject. Powering along on the Pacific Coast Highway on the way home from the Santa Barbara conference, I had to admit to myself that I had barely comprehended what many of the string cosmologists had been saying. In truth, most physicists don't understand this stuff either. Showing the logic.
That is, unfortunately, jump back, that is how bad science is. Most scientists don't understand it anymore. If you find it again.
Much everything that we do is based on the work of mathematicians and exhibitions about science. We don't have a newsletter, but we have, and we found...
Is it children more involved in science?
Yeah.
What it added up to was difficult to say. A further literary reference came to my mind. Alice's remark to Humpty Dumpty.
Jump forward too far. So, here we go.
Powering along on the Pacific Coast Highway on the way home from the Santa Barbara conference, I had to admit to myself that I had barely comprehended what many of the string cosmologists had been saying. In truth, most physicists don't understand this stuff.
Most physicists don't understand the stuff. We're back on track there, so they're just having a blind faith to go along with the mainstream point of view, and they don't understand it. It's stupid to be like that.
Most physicists don't understand this stuff either. I recalled a line from Flann O'Brien's surrealist novel, The Third Policeman. After one of the characters in the novel has atomic theory explained to him, he responds, "What you say must surely be the handiwork of wisdom, for not one word of it do I understand."
Yeah. So what's the point of saying things if nobody understands what you're talking about?
I was certain that in Santa Barbara I had heard the handiwork of wisdom, but what it added up to was difficult to say. A further literary reference came to my mind. Alice's remark to Humpty Dumpty after she reads the poem Jabberwocky.
So that poem Jabberwocky is just a poem of nonsense, and that's basically what physics is. Modern physics, that is. It's based on a lot of nonsense from Einstein.
Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, she said, only I don't exactly know what they are. I understood how she felt. My head also was filled with ideas I didn't know how to parse. Shimmering through the lights on the highway, I seemed to be in a dream. The trance-like threads of the cars mixing with the trails of all those simulated universes I'd been shown in Santa Barbara over the last few days. Was any of it real? Did any of these universes exist? Or was it all an artifact of the mathematical imagination?
Or just nonsense. Artifact of imagination, or just nonsense. You should try to think for yourself and come to the conclusion that it's nonsense.
I thank you. Would you autograph my book, and as you were doing it, tell our friends in the audience about your organization you've started to get, is it children more involved in science?
The organization that I have is called the Institute for Figuring, and I founded it as a way to do innovative public outreach about science and mathematics. So we put on exhibitions, we do lectures and workshops. It's actually aimed primarily at adults, and we found it to be immensely successful because people, I think, really want to engage with physics, like Jim Carter, the hero of my book. People want to understand.
And people who engage in physics, they should be encouraged to try to think for themselves and come to the conclusion that modern physics is nonsense, because Einstein is wrong. They should be encouraged when they come to that conclusion, because that is the correct conclusion to come to.
The universe.
Do you have a newsletter you put out?
We don't have a newsletter, but we have a website. We have a large website, www.theiff.org. And we have an exhibition space here in Chinatown in Los Angeles.
Oh, really?
So we put on exhibitions about subjects like physics on the fringe.
That's fabulous. I think that there really is something that has to be known more. People should know more about it.
We hope so. We are about to have a new exhibition opening in December, which is going to be all about mathematical concepts of space, the kinds of things that these people, that mainstream physics is trying to understand. And we're going to be building, as part of this exhibition, we're inviting our audience to help us build a giant mathematical fractal object out of 60,000 electrically designed business cards.
Ah, now, who are your sort of veterans? Who vets the ideas?
For our exhibitions. Basically, I decide on what we're exhibiting.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything that we do is based on the work of mathematicians and scientists and engineers. So we invite mathematicians and scientists to work with us.
Ah, yeah.
And so it's a close collaboration between the Institute for Figuring and scientists and engineers.
Well, between Caltech here and MIT over there and a few other places in between, it's got certainly an audience. Meanwhile, if you'd like to know what else we've been reading, visit me on the web at www.conniemartinson.com or look for our shows on YouTube, Connie Martinson's channel, or visit Claremont Graduate Library. They have digitized over 2,000 of our shows. But what you can do, support your local library. Libraries are our finest, really democratic institution in America. Get a library card. You want to be a scientist, look under S for Science, and you will find rooms full of books. And whatever you can do, support that library, and we'll see you next time.
Unfortunately, a load of those books on science have been heavily influenced by Einstein, and so they've got lots of things in them that are nonsense. Really, you need books from the alternative sector pointing out Einstein is wrong.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's the end. So that's it for it. And I point out again, you've got these people like Louis Eason, who's pointed out, have been critical of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, and you've just not really had a big debate with the mainstream about it. Mainstream has managed to suppress dissent with people who are saying that Einstein's wrong, and so they've created a dogma of fixing themselves, carrying on with Einstein and ignoring the dissent that's going on. And the dissent is growing in numbers as more and more people come to read books on modern physics and realise that it's built upon nonsense. So if I go to my site, got Professor Roger Wyden here, who's looked into the maths of Einstein and concluded it's nonsense. Here we go. And this site here, this one not talk I'll give you, that if you read Einstein and you come to the conclusion that Einstein is talking nonsense, it should be accepted by everybody that that is a valid conclusion you can come to. But with the mainstream, they don't want to reach that sort of conclusion. They want to believe that it's some sort of sense, even though it's nonsense. And next one, I think it was the next page. Next page. This video, point out that Dr. Edward Teller went to Einstein's lecture on relativity. He didn't understand it, and then he found out that Einstein didn't understand it either. And so, really, if Einstein don't understand what he's talking about, how can anybody else be expected to? When you've got something like that, the conclusion you should be reaching is that it's nonsense. If Einstein don't understand what he's talking about, then what he's saying should be considered to be nonsense. Next. So this one I point out the problem with people. They read Einstein's stuff, Einstein's relativity and things, and they come to the conclusion it doesn't make sense to them, but they then decide to believe it anyway, and so they're suffering then from a delusion. They decide to believe something which is not true, and that is sort of a faith to believe something that's not true and doesn't make sense. Next, and I'll go here and I'll give an example of some of the math. Here, some of the example of the maths that's being used in Einstein's relativity, and it's just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. And then basically, it is all built upon a lie, as pointed out by this lecture, that everything which Einstein was built upon was a lie. It doesn't true at all. It's just all false, and they don't want to accept that, and they're trying to ignore that as well. So, maths nonsense, built on a lie. Einstein didn't understand what he was talking about, and there's also bad teaching as well. If you look into, when it comes to the teaching of Einstein, it's bad teaching. They don't go into proper explanations of things, and if you were doing a teaching properly, you would be pointing out that this thing doesn't make sense, this other thing doesn't make sense, and this other thing doesn't make sense. But they're not doing that. They're also not telling you a balanced point of view on it. They're not pointing out that, well, some people might have believed Einstein, other people were dissenting and not believing it. So they're not giving a balanced point of view, and they're not pointing out how bad it is and how nonsense lots of it is. So they're giving the false impression that it's something accepted, and it's not. Only by people who want to have delusions. Well, from our point of view, of those who've looked at Einstein and decided it's nonsense, people who've decided to believe in it, we look upon them as having suffering some sort of delusion. I've got this one as well. This one's a good one. This one I'll give a little talk on.
And his book.
This one's a talk by. I'll give a talk on what Dr. Brian Wallace found out, and he found out that the people in the mainstream are trying to suppress the evidence that Einstein is wrong. I look at Dr. Brian Wallace's work. He's calling the situation a farce. In mainstream physics, it's a farce because they're trying to suppress the evidence about Einstein being wrong. And so there you go. So with our Margaret Wertheim, on her physics on the fringe, it's not something that she would really be aware about, that she was in a sheltered upbringing when she was being taught physics, and suddenly she's looked outside of that and found that there's physics on the fringe. There's us people who are dissenting with Einstein, and she wouldn't have been shown that point of view when she was doing her physics course. So there you go, end. Thank you.